if you have a friend and their parent or their caregiver constantly puts them down in comparison to you, that could be, that could be a deal breaker for the friendship. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed therapist. This commenter says, this was the demise of my 20 plus year friendship. Her grandmother was always praising and comparing me to her granddaughter, who is my bestie. Unfortunately, my friend became insanely envious, and it got worse with every setback in her life. And so this is, when parents and grandparents or whomever within our family unit constantly compare, their child next to you, they're putting their child in a predicament in which they're always set up to lose. And this is a way of which they're sabotaging the friendship, but they're also devaluing their own family member. And that could very well be the demise of, any friendship. And I'll tell you, just as an aside, a little personal story about myself. I had a friend, very long friendship like you, and her mother was an immigrant, and her mother was a lovely woman. I loved her to death. But with, what I've noticed with immigrant parents is there is no filter with an immigrant parent. So whatever they think, they are going to say, and it's going to cut you to the white meat. And so, I got to know her mother very well. And, her, the person that was my friend was kind of going through some stuff, and I'm not sure what it was that she was going through, some stuff with her job and things like that. So she wasn't working consistently. And, her mother would always, talk to me about what I was doing and this and that. And then she would, turn to her daughter and call her daughter a loser. And she's like, why can't you be more like her? You're a loser. It got to be like real uncomfortable for me. And I'm just like, oh, what can I say to that? I'm sorry, but what can I say to that? And so it got to be in a situation where it was uncomfortable and she felt bad. And no fault of my own, but her mother was pointing out things, and it would go from a statement to like almost like a verbal beatdown, like what are you doing with your life, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's between her and her mother. I can't compete with that. And so I had to give that relationship some space and ultimately just end it, because that's putting her in a situation where she and I can no longer just be friends, but she feels like she has to try and do something in order to gain acceptance and approval in her mother's eyes. And so that goalpost may be moving. I don't know if there's anything that she could do, but, sometimes people just want, some crumbs of approval from their parents. And so they're going to do what they need to do in order to do that. And if their parent centers you, and sort of triangulates you in that way, then they're going to always be hyper focused on you. And that's going to bring out their insecurities. They're going to feel inferior. They're going to feel like they have to compete. They're going to feel resentful of you. And they're going to feel like, why did you have to come over here and be who you are? Because now my parents or my family can't stop talking about you, and I don't like that. And most likely what it is things were already bad in that relationship to begin with, right? So you're just a neutral person that comes into it not knowing, right? And then you become like the topic of idolization. But things were most likely already on a downward turn. And then, boom, here you come. And it's like anything to make my child feel less than, put them down. Or, and sometimes parents look at it as a way of like, they don't even look at it as a way to put them down, but they look at it as a way of like motivating their child to get their child to do better. Like, gee, why can't you get up off your taster and do something and be productive? And it almost gets to a place where parents are resentful of their child because they see that their children aren't making an effort, or their children aren't utilizing their potential. But unfortunately, in the manner in which it's done, it kind of becomes this competition, or it becomes this point of contention, and where they're just, they're seething every time they see the child. And so unfortunately, it doesn't typically motivate their child to do better. It doesn't motivate their child to want to do anything besides lash out at the person who they're comparing them to. But trust and believe, if it wasn't you, it would be somebody else. And you're just really more of like, it just really a predicament. And it's probably, I hate to say it, but it's a good reminder of maybe there's certain people that you cannot be friends with. Doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means that, like, if the parent sees something and, they're always praising you, the parent in a roundabout way may be telling you that the two of you are misaligned anyway, that like, geez, you're kind of doing all these things and my child does nothing. My child's a loser. And she would say that. She would kind of go out and say it. And she's like, they're not doing anything with their life. And so that could be, just sort of a roundabout way. Again, it cuts to the white meat. No filters, no holds barred. But they're telling you, you guys aren't aligned, and my child is nothing like you. So that could also be an indicator there as well. But yeah, when you encounter that, that's probably a sign that you need to keep your distance. That person can be an acquaintance or whatever, but you guys may be misaligned, so you maybe need to focus on what you're doing and continue, associating yourself with peers who are more in alignment with you. But at the very least, you want to stay out of the crossfire between that person and their parent or caregiver who's continuing to do that, because at the end of the day, they're not going to take that as like, feedback. They're going to look at it as like competition, and you came in here and you stole whatever little thunder I might have had, or you just stole all the light, and I don't like that. So you got to get to stepping. So anyway, thanks so much for pointing this out. Hope this helps. Be sure to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the newsletter linked in my bio. Thanks so much.